So much for coming out. I know that there is so much that competes for your attention on a Tuesday evening, and so we really appreciate you making the time to be here and listen to this amazing panel. We're really excited about this. We had a great one in July and are excited to continue that conversation. I'm Dana Armstrong. I'm with Resolution to End Homelessness, and we're really excited to partner with Seattle University Project on Family Homelessness and Tech for Housing for this forum. For those of you who are not familiar with Resolution to End Homelessness, we are a new nonprofit that is focused on shining the light on all the amazing work that the service providers are doing on the front lines of homelessness, lowering the barriers for the community to get involved in those efforts, and just trying to get the word out about how you can help and be involved. On the bottom of the bottom page in front of you there's a paper that's things that you can do to get involved. On the back of that is the URL for our new platform of org requests that we've just launched, that our partner service providers post their needs to the community. And it's a great way to see what you can do to get involved and help out. So check that out, share it with your friends, let everybody know about it. And so then I want to pass it over to Catherine Heinrichsen from Seattle University.
Thank you very much, Dana. Can everybody hear me okay? All right, thank you. As Dana said, I want to thank you also for being here. There's so much going on tonight, even just on our campus, so really happy to see all these civically minded people here tonight. I'm Catherine Heinrichsen from the Seattle University Project on Family Homelessness. We are a communications and advocacy program that works to try to engage the community in ending family homelessness and homelessness in general. I also want to ask you to join me in recognizing that we are here on Duwamish Aboriginal territory, and ask you to join me in respecting the elders and the descendants, especially since what our history of our treatment of Indigenous people has a lot to do with homelessness among their population today, as you'll hear more about tonight. An important announcement, everything is compostable, so the bins are in the back. I also want to direct you to our information table in the back, where you'll see some information pieces on homelessness. You'll see some stuff from the Democracy Vouchers program from the City of Seattle. And we have some good news on that. Almost all the candidates have maxed out their vouchers, so that means that people are really participating in that program. So way to go, Seattle. And they're expanding the program to the mayoral campaign in 2 years and the at-large city council seats as well. So if you want more information about that, if you don't know what democracy vouchers are, I invite you to stop by back there. I am going to turn it over to Ethan now.
Thanks. I'm Ethan Goodman of Tech for Housing. We are a nonprofit that works to engage the tech sector around these issues of housing and homelessness. The panel tonight is going to give you a real good overview of homelessness in the Seattle area and how it relates to the local city council elections. So you'll get sort of a background on the issues. The flip side of that is understanding where the candidates stand. And so we have kind of a parallel resource for you on that. The organizations up here, along with the Housing Development Consortium and Solid Ground, put together a voter's guide for the city council elections. You can find that online. We sent questionnaires to all 14 candidates for city council. We got 13 responses back. So you can go find your district, find the 2 candidates in your race, and then read their thoughts on a number of the issues that have been discussed here today. So there's a flyer in the middle of your tables that gives a link to that. If you go to techforhousing.org, Voter's Guide will be one of the links up top. Also want to mention there are question cards in the middle of your table as well. So if you have questions throughout tonight's panel, write them down on a card, pass them up to me. I'll be sitting at the table just behind the camera here. I'll be sure to pass these cards up to our moderator, and we'll kind of mix them in throughout the panel. So there won't be a specific Q&A portion to raise your hand at the end. Instead, just get these comment cards or question cards up to me. Speaking of the camera, we are live streaming and recording. So if you missed something that was said, you don't have to try and furiously take notes, you can go back. If somebody wasn't able to be here tonight, you can refer them to the video on YouTube. Just go to YouTube and search for Housing Voter Forum, and you should find it. And with that, I'd like to introduce our moderator. Hannah Brooks Olson is a writer and political consultant, and thank you very much for joining us.
Hi. Can you hear it? I didn't think so. Oh, that would do it. I mean, it's fine because I'm like pathologically loud, but my name is Hannah. I'm a writer, as Ethan said, and my pronouns are she and her. And I was really excited to get asked to moderate this panel today because, so for the last like 4, I guess, years, I've been volunteering with Real Change, and then I was also their interim editor for a small period of time because nonprofits. And housing and homelessness is something that's like extremely dear to my heart, and it's an issue that I've been writing about a lot. My first and only article I ever got published in The Atlantic was about the importance of sleep and homelessness, and that was like 5 years ago. So this is something that I care a lot about. I'm also on the board of my legislative district, so I work with candidates and work within our sort of political activism for the Dems in my area. Which means that this year I have sat through something like 30 and change interviews with candidates. During endorsement season, we sit and talk to every single candidate who will come and talk to us. So it's a lot. But one thing I've learned in this election cycle especially, and I've been covering city politics and housing stuff for a while, is that everyone seems to have the language down, but I don't believe that everybody has the heart or the knowledge or the understanding or the ideology or the research. So every single candidate we talked to, said housing first. Then some of them went on to say, FEMA-style tents in a parking lot. So one thing I am cautioning a lot of people about, and one thing we're going to talk about a little bit here, is how to sort of parse what a candidate means, because they can say it and talk the talk, but you have to really kind of go to the next level and dig down to figure out where they are on things and what kind of policies they're going to make, because really fundamentally that's what matters with a lawmaker, is what laws they make. So with that, I am going to introduce, well, actually I'm going to have our panelists introduce themselves. I would love to know who you are, what your pronouns are, and what you're working on. Yeah, tell me what you're working on, just in general. You can start.
All right. Well, hi, everyone. My name is Colleen Echohawk. I use she, her pronouns. I'm an enrolled member of the Pawnee Nation of Oklahoma. I also belong to the Uprot and Athabascan people of Alaska, where I was born and raised. I am now the current executive director at the Chief Seattle Club. We serve folks who are experiencing homelessness, especially Native folks who are experiencing homelessness, which is important because we make up around 10% of the homeless population, which is the greatest race disparity in our homeless system right now. So what am I working on? I'm like really obsessed with this topic. And the reason I am is because I love our homeless population. I think they're beautiful, wonderful. I can't wait to hear their voices. I want to lift up everything they do. And to that end, one of the things we're working on right now is opening up a new village called Eagle Village, which is for Native people who've been experiencing homelessness. We're going to impact a lot of people, about 30 people that are going to be inside instead of outside. Native people are the most likely to be unsheltered. Native veterans most likely to be unsheltered. So I'm obsessed with that project. It's called Eagle Village. Our grand opening is on October 25th at 11 a.m. in Soto. You're all welcome.
Hey everyone, excited to see some familiar faces and new faces this evening. My name is Jesse Rollins. I currently work for the Public Defender Association. We are a nonprofit advocacy organization that works on public health and public safety issues. Mostly what I work on is I am the project manager for a program called the Law Enforcement Assisted Diversion Program. We are an arrest diversion program for people committing law violations that diverts them into a social services program instead of jail, which we find to be not as helpful as social services. In addition to that, I work on public policy advocacy around homelessness, drug policies, housing, really ensuring and trying to make sure that housing is accessible to a lot of folks that we see experiencing homelessness in our community.
Hi, everyone. My name is Richard Waters. I'm a family physician and work for Neighbor Care Health. Neighbor Care is a network of community health centers in the Seattle-King County area. And I specifically work with Neighbor Care's homeless and housing programs. So this is a subset of Neighbor Care Health that tries to innovate the delivery model of care in ways that is more accessible and kind of amenable to individuals who are either living homeless or who are in permanent supportive housing. I use he, him pronouns. He does too.
I do too.
And so the probably one of the main things we've been working on for a number of years is how do we really devise care programs, particularly for opioid use disorder, but also alcohol use disorders and care for people with stimulant use disorders, in a way that increases the uptake, increases people's interest in kind of services and treatment, increases the retention in care, and propels them in a path that they want to go. And so we've done that by kind of co-locating some high-value health services with LEAD, with the LEAD case management program, within permanent supportive housing, kind of in clinics that have perhaps kind of less of a kind of medical feel and more of a lounge feel, if you will. And we've had some good success working with folks, and it reinforces kind of my perception that there's a lot of interest if only the services were kind of catered in the right way.
Hi, everyone. My name is Lauren McGowan, and I oversee work around poverty and homelessness at United Way of King County. A lot of my work is focused in on helping business leaders and donors understand the issues related to homelessness and understand that there's both a role for charity and an even greater role for policy and legislation that works to solve these problems at the scale of the problem. One of the things that I'm really excited about right now is working across our community and technical colleges, where we're seeing a real increase in the number of students experiencing homelessness, and finding solutions that work for those students, both to connect them back to the mainstream homelessness system, but also to support our colleges in having the tools and resources to support students while they're on campus.
Something I just heard from like all of you is the need for services to be directly addressed to the people in need, as opposed to waiting for them to come to you or hoping that they come to you on your terms. You present the services in such a way that it fits, it fits. So to that end, to start on a positive note, who do you think is doing it right? I would love if you could tell me in just like 1 or 2 sentences who is doing it right in town right now. And you are free to say your own organization. I would not fault you for that. Jump in.
I'll go ahead and say, and this is in large part because I see the work that the LEAD case managers do on a daily basis, because we're Neighbor Care Health staff, and I work with a fantastic team of nurses and other medical providers and kind of behavioralists. So some of us are embedded within LEAD and see the amazing work that the LEAD case managers do at building trust with clients who not always have been kind of welcomed by various systems in town, and kind of advancing the plan forward so that they meet their goals. housing, health, a number of legal kind of issues being sorted out. So a hat tip to LEAD.
Yeah, I think I would definitely echo that. Man, Seattle-King County is amazing, right? I think we hear a lot about the crisis of homelessness in this region, and there is no doubt that that is true. But there are the most innovative, creative thought leaders on this issue in this community, and I think we have a whole heck of a lot to be proud of. So whether it's our chronic homelessness providers who have been really spearheading what housing first and permanent supportive housing can look like in our region, organizations like DESC and Plymouth Housing Group, organizations like Colleen's who have centered race and racial equity and the fight against racism, which is so clearly what's needed to address homelessness, and organizations that are focused in on changing public policy, like the Low Income Housing Alliance. There are, you don't go to other communities and see this, and I think part of our role is help lifting up those things that are working really well, finding those bright spots, and doing a heck of a lot more of it.
Yeah, I'll just add that LEAD is amazing, not because I get to work on it, but it is a really phenomenal program. So we are not specifically a homelessness response program, as I mentioned. So we are a program that diverts individuals from entering into the jail system for committing certain law violations into the social service program. We contract with an outreach program called the REACH program. I will also just piggyback and say that previous to my role at the Public Defender Association, I worked for a politician here local in Seattle, Councilmember Mike O'Brien, and I worked on homelessness issues for him, and all the time I would have different elected offices from around the country calling our office, asking us, what is Seattle doing? Seattle is where the good work is happening. And so I would say that we're doing the good work, it's just not at scale. And so we need to drastically bring it to scale to actually make a dent in the issue.
So that's so germane to my next question. Thank you, Jesse. Why can't we scale these programs? We have these programs that work and we can see them working. Like, where is the tension that keeps us from doing that? And vis-a-vis the topic that we are discussing today, what role does the City Council have in being able to help us scale these programs that do work? And any of you can just jump on in.
You sure?
Yeah.
Okay. So a couple of things. I think one, to do that would be that we need more revenue. We need, so there was a report that was commissioned by the Seattle Chamber of Commerce. I'm not sure if any of you remember it. It was drafted by a consultant company called McKinsey and Company. So they found that our region needed about an additional $400 million in revenue for housing to solve the homelessness crisis. Coincidentally, the chamber kind of abandoned the report because it didn't find what they wanted it to find. But it did find that we needed an additional $400 million in revenue. And so what I would say is that we need a city council, we need electeds that will be urgent and bold in finding additional revenue to actually solve the crisis. I'll give a really quick little pitch, though, that working for city council for 3.5 years, it's really hard to find revenue in our tax system in this state. So what I will say is that there was a report that just came out earlier this week about a system called coordinated entry. Does everyone know what coordinated entry is? So it's the housing resource system that matches a housing resource for someone experiencing homelessness. The report found a couple of different things. One is that our coordinated entry system is racially inequitable. So it favors white people experiencing homelessness for housing resources over people of color. Another thing that it found is that, and similar, Barb Poppy commissioned a report as well about 3 years ago, and what she found was that our coordinated entry system was pretty flawed, and that it really kind of categorically denied housing resources for kind of some of the most chronic, visible folks in our community. And so what I would advocate for and what I would suggest that City Council do is that they actually prioritize housing resources for those chronic homeless, the visible homeless, the ones that are really causing a lot of impacts to our community. Because if we can make a dent in that specific population of the homeless crisis, then we can largely gain public support for saying, hey, look, we've actually made a dent in this specific crisis and this kind of public disorder crisis of homelessness. So then we get the public support, and then we can actually get additional revenue, because in this current political climate, I don't see us getting additional revenue right now.
I would just add that I think that obviously revenue. I mean, that is just that is the elephant in the room that has to be addressed. I also think that there's a lot of room for innovation. I think that I would encourage our council members to think about like how they can encourage innovation in our system. We have some amazing organizations who were incredibly creative 20, 25 years ago, and they like modeled housing first to us. LEAD is another incredible innovation, and there has to be continued encouragement of that innovation, and there has to be money there, and there has to be recognition that some of these innovations are just going to fail, right? That has to be okay in the nonprofit community, and we have to understand that that's part of the way for us to find solutions for our folks who are outside tonight.
Yeah, I think the only thing I'd add is, I think that philanthropy and others have a real responsibility here in helping to help the broader public understand that the scale of this issue is so big. At a national level, only 1 in 4 people who is eligible for rent assistance receives it. We know that housing subsidies actually end homelessness, but we're not solving that. And we so often don't talk about that. And so when I talk to the donors we have at United Way and folks that are involved in this, a big role we have is educating them, and that these aren't simple, small solutions. That there's stuff we can all do today, but at the end of the day, we have to vote for leaders at a local, state, and federal level who actually believe that housing is a human right. Right? And that we don't have that across the board right now. And we don't have sort of uniform agreement that in order to do that, we have to invest in these solutions in a really, really big way.
You can absolutely add something.
Thank you. So I just wanted to quickly say, be very weary whenever you hear candidates talk about shelter as a human right. So what we see is that whenever shelter as a human right is implemented, that we really kind of force shelter whenever shelter is not accessible for everyone. So just echoing that housing is a human right, not shelter.
And it's possible, right? Like you have to believe that it's possible.
Right. And that housing looks different ways for different people and in different communities. Yeah, agreed. So that brings me to a question that I have, sort of about programs that we seem unwilling to scale, and how, Jesse, something you mentioned is like sort of how like public interest impacts policy. And I can think of a lot of programs that have been like floated for a small amount of time and then just like abandoned because people didn't think they were working, or it didn't seem, good enough. What would you encourage, like us as voters, like how do we deal with that? How do we deal with the fact that there's been this like pretty negative turn, away from policy that's based in empathy, and also away from, and I think, Richard, you can probably speak to this, away from the idea that we do actually have data on things and we know what works. It might not always be what we wish worked or what we feel like in our gut should work, but we know it does work. Like, so how do we as voters take part in that?
Do you want me to answer?
Yeah, sure.
I I think one of the things, Hannah, that you brought up was really paying attention to people's candidates' values. What are their values that they're running on? Are they compassionate? Are they bold? Are they urgent? If they're not one of, or actually all three of those things, then I think that you can be skeptical about how they are going to address our community's largest crisis. I think that, we have a lot of programs that have evidence behind them that work. Again, the problem is just that we can't bring them to scale because of the revenue issue, because we don't have the amount of funding that we need to bring those programs at scale.
And I totally agree with that. And would just add, kind of as a voter, even just as a community citizen, a healthy degree of skepticism when you hear a simple fix. If we could just do like this, which is totally feasible in our current funding climate, everything would work. If we just if we just had a city council that just did that, which is totally doable, everything would be fixed. Kind of just to the prior question, the scale of the problem, I think the candidates or policymakers who emphasize the magnitude of the problem and that this is honestly not going away anytime soon, without something bold and massive that addresses a number of factors that lead to homelessness on the prevention side, that kind of get people out of homelessness on the kind of, call it, treatment side in terms of getting people into housing. So I think as voters be our skepticism and our asking for the data. Great if we if we could just have people go through this 5-day program, everything turns rosy. Well, what's the data on that 5-day program? And there are good things. We do have a number of things that are very evidence-based. Permanent supportive housing will be something you'll probably hear more. You've heard it already in terms of housing first, permanent supportive housing. Kind of the data shows, and this is randomized controlled data, so like the highest quality of data. You're going to, if you take people who have been living homeless chronically, and they have the number of disabilities, you're going to get like a 96% retention rate in housing. So if the goal was simply looking at how do we keep people housed, we have an intervention that works exceptionally well. It just takes some boldness to fund.
The only thing I'd add to that is I think we all just need to get a little louder. And, all of you being here tonight, amazing. And we got to get our friends and family members and relatives and neighbors who don't think the way that we do involved in this issue to understand it. We have thousands of people who are unsheltered tonight. And when folks actually hear that, then they start to understand the scale of the issue. But I think so often what we see are tents and the impacts of homelessness, and it's too easy for folks to become numb to that, and we can't let them. And we need to challenge our friends and neighbors to be stronger on this issue, to talk about this as a human right, and to all come together around this. And we've got to stay engaged once we elect our leaders and push them and challenge them and show up at City Hall and in Olympia and in DC because this is going to take a movement if we really want to address this.
I know I'm the moderator, but I will add one thing to that, which is that one thing I have been noticing more and more is a feeling of almost like victimization by housed people, that like homelessness is sort of an affront to them. And I actually heard Sarah Rankin, who I believe is a Seattle U professor, speak on this issue at one point, that there's like cognitive research about what happens in your brain when you see visible poverty, which is that like basically you go into a defensive mode and it's like scarcity. And so I would think too, like when we talk to our friends and neighbors, that's also something to keep in mind, that like, when you see a person who's living outside, like they're not doing that to you. And like, if you back up and think about that one.
If I can just add to that. You know, one thing I had this experience where I came into conversation with a friend of mine who experiences schizophrenia. And he was talking things out with me, and he said, Colleen, do you know I hear voices? I said, yes, I know you hear voices. And then he said, and then he started crying because he felt really bad because he knew that he had caused me and my organization trouble at times because his paranoia tells him like these things are out to get him, and he gets really scared. And I love to tell the story because we have to remember that people who are experiencing homelessness, it's not fun for them. It is terrible. It is scary. It is, you're threatened all the time by all kinds of things out there. It is not, I also had an experience recently where I came across a pile of fresh human feces. And I had a quick instant, because I almost stepped in it. I was quickly like almost irritated, and I thought, what would it have been like? Where would I have to be mentally to get to that? Right in the middle of on the sidewalk in Pioneer Square. And so we have to remember this human experience that people are experiencing out there. And we have to like work so hard to be understanding what that must be like. Every single time I see someone who's experiencing homelessness, I try to understand that I often say, oh, babies, because that's someone's baby out there who is struggling. And so if I think about what I want our elected officials to think about, I want to see them understand and empathize deeply, to feel it passionately, that it is a human right and that we need to serve and love our neighbors, our relatives who are experiencing homelessness.
Word. So one of the ways that we know that also like homelessness impacts people is it's sort of a like broad or obvious fallout of an economic structure that just is not working for a lot of people. And that's also why we see, we see a lot of homeless children. And, in Seattle public schools, the estimate is, I think, that every Seattle public school has at least some number. There's like one homeless kid in every classroom, basically, averaged across the state. And then we also see a lot of homeless seniors. So as, I think all of us, sort of most of us in this room even, members of the sandwich generation, where, you might have kid-level people that you're caring for, but you might also have parent-level people that you're caring for, and the economic sort of strain that comes from that. How do we help folks who are feeling the strain, one, with an eye on preventing homelessness, but just in general, like sort of alleviating that economic constraint, which leads people to that place?
They're kind of thinking of the causes of homelessness, many different causes, but one similar feature is going to be kind of this economic hardship, this poverty, where I think of it as kind of this two-hit hypothesis. Something has to kind of hit you to help make you not be able to afford housing, and then your social networks have to be either unable or unwilling to kind of house you, to fall into kind of unsheltered homelessness. Technically, if you're living with someone and not paying rent and very vulnerable to the whims of their decisions, you would be considered homeless. But to fall into unsheltered homelessness is something that hits you and your community, and certainly where communities, where the social networks are predominantly amongst individuals who are of similar kind of economic hardship, dealing with poverty and right on that edge, the more we can do to boost communities, so not just individuals, but communities, so that there's a greater community buffer. We're gonna do really well in preventing homelessness, which will likely save ample public dollars in kind of dealing with crises downstream, because things get much worse once someone falls into unsheltered homelessness. And there's some good research. Raj Chetty, economist, who's done lots of research, some in Seattle, not necessarily looking at homelessness, but kind of looking at keeping people in housing and moving to opportunities and different kind of housing resources. And helping with subsidies, which Lauren had mentioned, can be a very viable policy intervention, very doable, just again takes the scale that could help people who are feeling this economic strain and may be surrounded by community members feeling a similar strain.
Yeah, I mean, I think the notion of community is so right on, right? It's that the more that we can reach out to people, it's why like McKinney-Vento liaisons who are working in the K-12 system and reaching out to families that are struggling are so critical. The more we can help people before they get into crisis and experience the trauma of homelessness, the better off they're going to be. But it can be really hard, right? It's people are scared and they're embarrassed, and folks don't know how to ask for help, where to turn. So I think that there's a lot that we can all do to help people understand that there are resources available. They may not yet be at the scale we want them to be, but if we can reach out and get them connected to services that do exist, the sooner we can do that, the better off they're going to be. And then really thinking about what we all can do, you know, as we fight for like the bigger fights of fixing our tax system and creating more mental health resources and more housing. What can we all do to reach out to people, to look people in the eye when we see them, to let them know that resources are available, to reach out and touch people? Those are all really important things.
Give Ethan your questions, by the way. He's coming for them. Write your questions down.
I'll come around a few times.
Okay, I just want to make sure I was reminding everybody. Carry on, anybody? If not, I have another question. So, one thing that's come up a lot in these city council races that I've seen is this notion of like transparency and accountability, and this idea that there maybe is enough money in the budget, we just have to use it more wisely. Where does that come from? Or like, I don't know, speculate on it, like go for it.
Well, I don't know where it comes from. Well, actually, I have a hypothesis, is that because we serve a disproportionate amount of folks who are people of color, I think it's probably stemmed in institutionalized racism, that we just don't want to, we just believe that people of color don't deserve the same resources. They haven't pulled themselves up by their bootstraps hard enough so that they can, you know, get to where they need to get. So I think it's stemmed in that probably. I will say that I have worked with almost every agency in the city who does things in such incredible ways, and they are held so highly accountable. If you have a contract with the city of Seattle or with King County, you are under a microscope and you are being looked at, your numbers are being counted. You have to give them a number at the beginning of the year saying, I think I'm gonna house this many people, and you're reporting on that, and you have to like show it in the system. You have to be incredibly clear on your data. So the system is holding people accountable. There's just not enough money to do everything that we need to do.
I'll just quickly say it's easy to say that. It's easy to say that we're not being accountable with the funds that we have. It's just a scapegoat. It's just a really easy talking point to say, you know, we can make the system more accountable whenever we know from report after report after report is that we need a lot more revenue for housing if we're going to make a dent in the homeless crisis.
And I think, yes, to everything they've said, you're absolutely right. It's a talking point. It's easy to say, be more accountable. And absolutely, we should all be accountable. We should be accountable to people experiencing homelessness, first and foremost. We should be accountable to donors and taxpayers and to ourselves. We hold contracts with most of the agencies in town. They do incredible work every single day on shoestring budgets. And so it's time for businesses and philanthropy and government to also be accountable. And part of that is figuring out and talking about what it actually means to end homelessness. And as somebody who has worked for a philanthropic organization who has at times said we need to be more accountable, because we do have to be accountable, the dot to that is, it is about talking about what the resources are that are needed at the scale of the problem, and we forget to say that far too often.
And to add, yes, agree with everything that was said, but also to put a different nuance, I think there is a reasonableness in the public perception at saying, are things getting done well? Because of scale, which is probably the biggest threat to evidence-based interventions, doing them on a small scale may not result in a noticeable change to someone who's not following the data, who's not looking at reports, but seeing what they see. And so to counter that threat is either kind of really good messaging about the impact programs that aren't at scale are having, and trying to bring things that are evidence-based to scale.
I think that's a good point. And I think the reality is there's so little money that goes into talking about what works, because all these agencies are so accountable and working with clients and doing the right things that we fail often to celebrate the incredible work that happens in all of your organizations every day. And we need to do more of that. Hannah, maybe you can get on that.
Well, I was going to say the absence of media is not exactly helping that issue. I do think that there's something really to be said about being critical of the media you take in as well, and looking at, remembering for every news article you see about one specific side of a thing, what is the rest of it? Yeah. And I think that's something we're seeing a lot, which is sort of a very self-same media atmosphere. So we got a super good question here that I'm going to read, but I need to grow a third arm to make it happen. Okay, I got it. This is my third arm. The enabling hypothesis, that's in quotes, is everywhere in media coverage. Oh my God, so timely, guys. The idea that by providing housing and services, we are enabling the person in crisis to make bad decisions. How do we most effectively challenge this misperception? Hit it. Y'all got it. Colleen, you have an idea. Go for it.
I'm waiting for someone else to jump in.
I think we all have this ingrained sense of fairness. Family, victim of domestic violence, has kids. Yes, they deserve. Single guy in his 20s or 30s using methamphetamine and heroin, he's not deserving. And there are so many layers at what brought someone to that point. The call it blame's not the right word, but kind of the root causes of that are so diffuse often in structures. But I would, and then we could spend hours and hours talking about that. I would counter it most directly with, it doesn't matter. That you could say whether or not you look at a group of people, and this is just very like McKinseyan maybe, what was McKinsey, like just data driven. If the goal is helping people with substance use disorders to use less substances, a caring atmosphere, one that supports them in kind of self-efficacy and self-belief is going to be far better. Negative emotions bring people towards substances. Positive emotions bring them away. If your goal is to keep people housed, Housing First is going to achieve that permanent supportive housing for those who are chronically homeless with a high kind of degree of disability in many areas is going to be the best intervention. So whether or not a community views a certain group as sympathetic or not doesn't change the way on how to get the outcome that most everybody agrees on.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would just try to push back on that narrative and really kind of think about what that person is really frustrated with is they're frustrated with seeing outdoor public drug use, people experiencing homelessness, this visible homelessness. And so to push back on that, I mean, I don't think anyone here on the panel believes that anyone should be living outdoors. We ultimately don't believe that. We believe that everyone should be living inside. The reality is that we do have thousands of people that are living unsheltered, and we have a lot of people that are using substances that are chemically dependent in public. I think, though, that this idea of enabling, the data doesn't really support that. So the people that, people love talking about data, and they're like, data. So I like to push back and say, well, the data shows that actually housing is the golden key. That is the intervention that actually reduces people's substance use. It actually supports people's mental health issues, and housing actually fixes homelessness.
And there's also, I mean, there's decades of that data. Like, that is not, like, some of this is newer because we're just now studying it. Some of it is, you know, being put into different dollar amounts because inflation exists. But that's old, like, that's old data. Like, the old original, like, wet housing models were extremely effective. And so I think that is a good way to push back. Okay, I have another question, and I don't know if anyone's going to have an answer to this, but I bet Lauren, I bet you will. So, if/when the new homelessness authority is created as an independent agency, what, if any, impact will any Seattle elected official have? Oh, Jesse's ready.
So when I worked for Councilmember Bryan, he is part of a group called the Client Group. The county and the city both have two different groups, which consist of 4 council members that are there to represent the legislative interests for this new government entity. I'm honestly super weary of the new government entity. I think about, so in the city and the county's budget process, so they have a lot of legislative authority to budget and to budget how we respond to issues like homelessness. And so one of the things that I'm super kind of concerned about is that removing that legislative budgetary authority from responding to homelessness from our elected officials could have an impact on what we as a public want to see happen. So I'm a little bit wary. I think, again, the McKinsey report found that a new government entity is a good step for us. But I do think that city council and county council should be a little weary that they are going to lose a lot of power in terms of budgeting a homelessness response.
Yeah, I think I think just to add to that, I support the regional authority because I think that right now we do have duplicative levels of government working on similar issues. And while I think there's some things to be worried about, and I think it needs to be looking at sort of all of the issues associated with homelessness, you know, this issue we talked about earlier around the coordinated entry system being incredibly racist and having very challenging outcomes. We've known that for a long, long time, and we should have done something about it. And my hope if folks like us and the city councils and the new leadership of the regional entity can do the work in the way that they should, they will be able to make decisions much quicker that actually get to the ground level and affect change. And we are not doing that right now because we've got 10,000 meetings and work groups trying to figure it out. So that's my hope.
You're not joking on the 10,000 meetings.
So many meetings.
I mean, it is so many meetings, and I have been really involved as this whole process
Seattle
is
loves
happening.
the process.
God, it's just, it's really remarkable. But I echo your sentiment, Lauren, that it is exciting, and it has to happen. I think to answer your original question, that the council members are going to have limited authority in this. I believe that the executive committee has one council member on it, that the mayor will, and I think they'll discuss that, and so will the King County Council as well. We'll each have one council member represented. But what is exciting to me is that the Lived Experience Coalition will be like at the forefront of all of this work. The lived experience community needs to be there and needs to have a say. If you think about 20 years ago when we were doing all of this work in homelessness, I really don't think there was, I don't know for sure, but I don't think there were people who were experiencing homelessness who were helping make the decisions. And there were very, very few people of color. I know that there were no Native people, and I don't have the data because I don't think it's accessible really, but there were very, very few people. So I think when we see these outcomes, of incredible race disparity. We have to think about who was at the table making those decisions and policies that have encouraged this race disparity. And I'm really excited to see what will happen when we have people of color at the table who are making the decisions and making them fast. Like, we need to go.
Yes,
I mean, we're at the same way. We're like, Lauren and I are at those same meetings. Like, I am so ready to like move quickly and be flexible and adapt and evolve as quickly as we can and bring as many people indoors as possible.
And that's the kind of accountability we need in our community.
Right, that's actual accountability. Really quickly, do not forget to fill out your evaluation card or your evaluation thing in the middle of your table, but only if you say very nice things about me. I'm kidding, you can say whatever you want. But seriously, only nice things. So that, Colleen, you brought up something that I wanted to ask about. And Lauren, I think probably you can, actually all of you can speak to this. What do the policies look like that help end this, one, race disparity, but also disparities of other, we have a large population of people living outside with chronic illness, with various disabilities, who are, with mental health issues. So like, what are those policies that close those gaps? Like what? I mean, you could give me just like one.
I mean, there's so many ways to answer that. And again, if we had the funding to like do it, I think it could be incredible. I think that, encouraging some of the programs that are really working and that are evolving all the time, like LEAD. I think the other programs that need to be really pushed forward are programs that I completely focused on meeting the cultural need of a community. So the immigrant and refugee community, they have very specific needs. They have different amazing ways to think about housing that we're just not even in our framework. The Native community is a great example of that. The work we're doing at the Chief Seattle Club is very specific towards the Native community who's experienced a tremendous amount of current trauma, but historical and generational trauma that causes our folks to not want to go anywhere near a Western medical system because they've experienced, all kinds of incredible hard things. So we just need to be innovative about those cultural programs and understand that we're going to have to learn how to recognize that culturally specific programs are part of the way that we will end homelessness.
Yeah, I mean, I think the best way that we can address some of the disparities that exist is by preventing homelessness in the first place, right? And so we know that, for instance, evictions are a leading cause of homelessness, especially for women, especially for people of color. And so, there's been some eviction reform legislation at the state level, some private philanthropy. United Way has launched a program that just in 4 months has helped thousands of people not be evicted, right? Like, I mean, what a common sense solution. We also have a lot of folks who just need small amounts of rental assistance, and that could keep them in their homes. And there is very little funding for that. Right? And so if we think about where we take streams of flexible dollars and give it to people so that they can stay in their homes, stay with their neighbors, stay in their communities, we're going to go a long way in addressing the crisis.
I think one other additional thing, again, I harp on coordinated entry a lot. I don't love it that much. I think taking coordinated entry and turning it upside down, really revamping it. As Lauren mentioned, coordinated entry has been racist, and service providers, we've all known that for a very long time. So really revamping coordinated entry so that we're making sure that our housing resources are accessible for people of color.
Are there any policies that you can think of right now that are like moving around city council that would be beneficial in this way?
And the system is sort of paralyzed right now as we wait for the regional authority to come together. So there's nothing really that I know of that's happening right now because everything is focused on the regional authority and getting that all pulled together. And once we get there, there'll be like a lot of things that are happening, hopefully. Crossing all the fingers.
Can I borrow your mic?
Oh yeah, we're down one.
I lost my mic. There's actually some really interesting federal policies, and while we're focused on electing city councilors, those city councilors can be a really powerful voice for things that happen at a federal level. And so there's some legislation right now that's really looking at the definition of homelessness. So HUD uses a different definition of homelessness than 11 other agencies in our federal government. And what that means is that resources, particularly for students, young families, college students that are doubled up, they often aren't able to access a lot of homelessness resources. The rationale there is that we're focused on the most vulnerable, but there's new data that shows that students in the K-12 system, regardless of whether they are unsheltered or doubled up, they do really, really poorly. So we need to focus our resources, and one of the things at the federal level, and I think having voices of local elected officials championing things like that can be really helpful.
So homelessness, we know, is directly related to increases in housing costs. Every city council member I've spoken to has made some sort of pledge about somehow magically making housing more affordable while also retaining home values for people who own homes. I don't know how that works. I'm not a scientist. But can you speak to a little bit like what can the city council do? What is the potential for a city council member or like folks? Like, what do we do about like housing cost disparity and, obviously income inequality is a part of that too, but what do we do around the housing component of it? Maybe rental reforms or anything you could speak to about that?
Sure. So I forgot the latest stat, but some 80% or some like about 80% of Seattle is zoned for single family housing. That may be the wrong number, but it's somewhere quite high. And as we get, I believe in 2018, it was some 130,000 new residents moved into Seattle and about 48,000 new dwellings were created. And just most of the people moving in are going to have higher incomes. That's going to push everything up. The rental pressures show no signs of kind of abating. This is undoubtedly only going to get worse, which has the potential to push this homelessness crisis kind of further and further into King County and beyond, and it already is. So, I'm going out of my lane here as a doc, but I've heard and it seems credible that kind of zoning regulations and allowing more densification, more density seems to be really helpful. And then there's also this phenomenon of people who have been renting, and their rent may trickle up over time gradually, and then a new company owner comes in, buys the property, and rents jump up very quickly. That is a very vulnerable period of time when individuals then have a fraction of time to figure out where to go next. And what I've seen in my patients is that's the time when people fall into sleeping in their cars or having to be with a family member, but maybe only for a short period of time. Rather than knowing, great, my rent's going up gradually over the years. Maybe once it hits this level, I've got to start thinking of looking for another job, moving. That phenomenon of someone buying a property, rising rents very quickly seems quite amenable to legislation.
I think it's such a tricky issue, and there are some things, and another way to look at it is for folks that are not experiencing chronic homelessness, we have a lot of folks who need better wages. And one of the things we do a really poor job of in this region is connecting people experiencing homelessness with better paying jobs. We should have a major jobs campaign that helps people who are able to work, want to work, and really must work in order to increase their incomes to be able to afford housing. But that's going to take employers coming together. It's going to take investments from our local government and helping to make sure that there are resources when people are first getting into jobs and getting them transportation and clothing and other resources. And And there's lots of good data on what works and what doesn't. And private philanthropy, we put in about $1 million a year into jobs programs for people experiencing homelessness. We need millions more.
I would just quickly say again, housing.
Yes.
Housing is the answer. As was previously mentioned, we definitely have a density issue in this city. I'm from the East Coast, so I was very shocked to come to Seattle and see what the zoning actually looks like. So we need to build housing urgently and be very bold about building housing. I mean, if I was running for city council, my campaign would be, I'm coming for your single family zone. That's just what it would be.
Well,
And we will vote for you.
I want to add, is my mic on? Okay. I just want to add that, yes, we have to build housing, but we also have to understand that housing has discriminated against people of color for a very long time. So we need to build housing. We need to have housing that is built by people of color and led by people of color, like the Africa Town Project, Liberty Bank, like El Centro de la Raza, like Chief Seattle Club is building, like the American Indian Service Commission is building housing. We have to understand that the housing that in our city is, like, I'm gonna guess, but it's probably around 90% is led by white people, and all of the structures are set up for white people to succeed in those housing. So we have to do a big shift. Equity means that we have to fund organizations that have never done housing before. It is not rocket science. We can all build housing, every single one of you here, but the people of color in this room should think about building housing, because that is how we will see people of color brought into secure housing and stability.
Anybody want to talk about I-1000 while you're on the subject of working with the government and being a person of color? We could just stick it and say, just like vote to approve I-1000.
Vote on it. It's
Literally vote to
important.
it.
I
One of the
believe in
reasons
it.
that most of the government contracts, and I think now it's like 97%, it's literally 97%, are held by white dudes is because of I-200, which was passed 20 years ago. So just a little plug for contracting and very wonky things that are on your ballot in November. I would love to talk specifically to Jesse and Richard. I feel like there is obviously we know there's a ton of stigma about substance use disorder among folks who are living, especially like unsheltered, like, as HUD calls them, technically homeless. It's literally what they say. Just talk to me about what, I feel like a lot of people feel like that just came out of nowhere. And it was just one day it was fine, and then it was like, so can you talk to me about how did we get where we are, what's happening there, and what are the policies that we're trying to do to bring it back and course correct?
So I think one of the, has everyone seen the film, the show Seattle is Dying? I know. So just hear me out. So I actually think that us using the narrative of Seattle is dying is not a bad thing. So I do think that, as a community, we should agree that outdoor problematic drug use is not okay. Yeah. People should not be using drugs in public spaces. That should just be unacceptable. The reality is that we have a lot of drug users that are unsheltered, and they don't have a safe place to use. They don't have a home. And so I would really just kind of capture that narrative and use it to our benefit. A lot of people talk about the San Francisco model of San Francisco is going to start forcing treatment onto its unsheltered population that are substance users. The legislation, honestly, if you read it, is going to affect a very, 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 very small portion of the population in San Francisco. They are not mass forced treatment on people experiencing homelessness that have co-occurring substance use disorder. So I would say that forced treatment doesn't work, and we need to be employing a lot more harm reduction models like the LEAD, like the Law Enforcement Assisted Diversion Program, that really meets people where they're at and gives them whatever they need to help reduce their use or address their problematic use.
The stigma against people with substance use disorders is not helping at all. In a way, it is understandable if someone is looking onwards and has never dealt with a substance use disorder, doesn't have a family member, might not understand it, might have a good intentioned but blatantly kind of wrong idea that, oh, if you just go to this 1 month inpatient treatment, and then you come out, why isn't everything fine? Like, oh, you used again, but you went to a 1 month treatment. Why? Oh, it must be you. You don't really want, why are you doing this? I think it's coming from a place of not understanding the biological and physiological mechanisms, of not understanding kind of how trauma influences behavior. In a way, there's many similarities with other chronic diseases, even though it takes a very distinct form that we see in public, raises fear. And certainly the Seattle's dying narrative agreed, like it shouldn't be happening outside. We should be providing safer places. There's this narrative that's happened in the city council elections of if we can just force treatment, if we can just somehow arrest and put people in a treatment, that will fix everything. And while that may or may not be coming from a good place, let's assume it's coming from good intentions, not going to work. Again, positive emotions bring people up and out of substance use. Negative emotions bring people down. The best things that we can do is to expand kind of evidence-based medical interventions, and we have good ones, very good ones, for opioid use disorder. We're not using all of them. Canada and Europe is using some others, including injectable opioid agonist therapy. We're using oral opioid agonist therapy with buprenorphine, also called Suboxone and methadone. So we're not taking advantage of the full suite of medical interventions we could to address opioid use. Medications for alcohol use disorders are grossly underutilized. And then research and innovation regarding stimulant use disorders, methamphetamine and cocaine. There's not a lot happening in that area, and we could, we as the medical community, we as researchers, this is something that Seattle kind of council is, could have a small impact, but not kind of this more National Institutes of Health thing. There's more research that's needed there, but the best thing that we can do is to shift the thinking to say, how do we empower and embrace people who are using drugs so they can reach their full potential, and how do we kind of help them see hope is going to help more than anything.
Just super quick. So if you see a city council candidate telling you that they're going to provide treatment, like what are they, like, do they even know what treatment is? Like, what do they actually mean by treatment? Like, what are they actually talking about? Like, really push them to define what do they mean by treatment. I think also, city council is not in the business of funding treatment. The city council has only funded about $1 million in treatment versus this very large city budget. So they're not really in the business of providing treatment to people with substance use disorder. I will also say that I co-wrote a proposal with a local and national substance use disorder expert, Dr. Judith Suey, and we proposed to Mayor Jenny Durkin to fund a research pilot for addressing methamphetamine use disorder using a stimulant analog, namely Ritalin, and the mayor declined, and we are currently advocating for the city council, and some city council candidates are actually discussing the pilot, so pay attention to that as well.
I have two cards here that are asking similar questions, so I'm going to combine two of your questions here. So there's a lot of them. I apologize if I did not get to yours. So one person asks, I work at a tech company in Seattle. What do you see specifically as their role, as in what should they be doing? As employees, what do you recommend that we advocate for, or like how do we advocate? And then this other question is, how can I get friends and neighbors to care and focus their time on ending homelessness versus cultural activities? You can do both, it's okay. But I think the bigger question just is, how do we get everyone on board? Like, what do you do? How do you talk to your friends? And if you work at a tech company or you work in an organization that has funding, like then what? And I feel like, Lauren, you're a great person to start on that.
I think it's a great question. I think everyone has a role to play in ending homelessness, right? And I think it starts with talking about it. It is a fact of life for over 11,000 people on any given night, 30,000 people throughout the year in our community. And just starting to talk about it within your workplace is a really important thing. And then giving people tools to get involved. The United Way website has volunteer opportunities for almost every agency in town. You can get involved as a volunteer. Think about how to get involved in local elections, donating your time, donating your financial resources. Of those are important stepping stones for folks in order to be able to get some of that empathy that we were talking about. And some of it is having bold conversations and not being afraid to talk about the fact that that any of us can be the folks that are experiencing homelessness. I think so often we sort of do this othering thing. And I will say my mom experienced homelessness and actually died on the streets of Connecticut while I was working on homelessness issues. If that can happen to my family, it can happen to anybody's family. And having conversations about that, I think, are really important. And finding ways to get involved. And it may not start with being the boldest advocate. It may be giving a few dollars to an organization you really care about or volunteering. Every one of those things is valuable and has a role to play as you move forward in your journey in advocating on this issue.
One thing I want to add to that is that one of the issues we've had in the homelessness system is we haven't communicated well on what to do, what you all can do. And I think that the regional authority, that's one of the things I keep pushing super hard, because we need to be telling the stories of the successes. We need to be, for those folks who are comfortable, we need to be telling the stories of folks who are experiencing homelessness. And we need to be saying, this is what you can do right now. And I'm going to mention two things. One, if you're at a company, figure out what you're passionate, if it's family homelessness, if it's native homelessness, whatever it might be, and go to that organization and do a fundraising campaign for them on social media. That's an easy way to kind of get engaged right away and get your folks into whatever issue it might be. Like Microsoft, if any Microsoft people are doing it here in the room, Microsoft's doing it right now for Cheese Seattle Club. So that's one really cool and easy way. And the other thing is I do, every chance I get, I try to talk to someone who's experienced homelessness. I did it right when I came on the way here. Some guy I hadn't met before, but I've met a lot of folks. And he was letting me get out, pull my vehicle out before he pulled his cart in front of me. And I stopped and I said, hey, thank you so much. And he just smiled and beamed. Talk to our community, not our homeless community. Talk to your relative. That is someone that is connected to you, because we are all human beings. So that is one of the most important things that I think you can do. And let's just really push our regional authority to really start communicating further on what is going to be good for our whole system.
I think one of the other really important things is framing. When I, in my current job, I engage a lot with community members. And when I worked for Councilmember Bryan, I also had to engage with a lot of community members in District 6. Just letting that for a moment. Yeah, just letting that sit.
I was just remembering the time that someone called you a Freddie Mercury or a John Waters lookalike.
John Waters and Freddie Mercury. I've gotten both, which I appreciated.
Yeah,
I liked it. Yeah, I loved them.
Awesome.
So I think, what I've learned a lot is that really framing the issue and meeting people where they're at. So in these conversations around homelessness with your friends or your neighbors, things can get hostile because people are angry. And I really think validating people's anger, because we should be angry that there are thousands of people living in public space. And so I think, affirming and confirming people's anger and identifying that, I also agree. I don't think people should be living outdoors. The reality is that there are thousands of people living outdoors, and we need realistic solutions to actually address the problem.
was just going to say, if you're in tech, and this is more of an unreachable perhaps goal, like in the immediate term. Ask the question, what's the income disparity across the organization, and what can we as an organization do to reduce that income disparity, or at very least raise the incomes? There's a direct correlation between health and income, or health and purchasing power. So if you are a tech worker, if you are in a large organization and are able to kind of start asking those questions that generate some thought about the ability of your organization to rethink the pay scale of different folks, that could do a lot for prevention.
And find out if your company has a matching program. Like if your company matches and then you go to I don't know if you all know this, we are deep in charity meal season, which is just that everyone's doing their fundraisers right now. And so I know Colleen and I have run into each other at numerous fundraising events. But a lot of employers have matching. And so your money literally goes farther. So just take the 5 seconds to look at the, whatever intranet at your office and find out if that's something. Are we done, Zoe, by the way? I think we're just about at time. Okay. Well, I wanted to thank you all for coming. It is hard, I think, to give up your time and sit in a room and think about things that are uncomfy. But I would also, I feel like I spend a lot of time, and it's just echoing what Colleen said, I spend a lot of time talking about homelessness, but I really do encourage folks to spend some time talking to folks, and that goes, volunteering. If you have 1 day a week, 1 day a month that you can go serve a meal, sort cans at the food bank, which actually is super fun, by the way. Buy a frickin' Real Change paper. Buy Real Change paper once a month, if only because that's when my column runs. I have a monthly column in Real Change, and it's always about barriers to entry and small, tiny things that are difficult for folks living outside. So that's just my plug. Anybody else want to plug anything real quick before we go?
I'm going to do something quick. So we have an event on October 26th, right down the street at Seattle Central College, for families experiencing homelessness. And it's a great opportunity to learn about, sort of get your family involved, learn what families are really struggling with. And if you're interested, find me afterward, or you can look it up on the United Way website.
October 25th, the grand opening of Eagle Village. We are reducing native homelessness by 3%, so we're pretty excited about that. And it's going to be a really fun cultural event and lots of food and party and hangout. So, yeah. Check our website and Facebook. Follow Chief Saddle Club on social media. I like that.
That's good.
Oh, can I plug one event as well? Tech for Housing is having a happy hour next Wednesday, October 23rd. So if you want to come down to South Lake Union, if you're in the tech industry, or if you're not, you're still welcome to come to our happy hour. Find it on our website, techforhousing.org/calendar. We'll be raising money for Bellwether Housing there. So that's next Wednesday.
And I'd like to give a big round of applause to our amazing panel and moderator. Thank you so much to all of you for taking the time to share this great knowledge and insight that I think helps all of us think of maybe a little bit differently about a few things. So I really appreciate that, and thank you all for coming. I also have something to plug. So Resolution on Homelessness, we have town halls every month. This is our town hall for this month, but typically they are at Ivar's Seafood House on North Lake. Generally, they're kind of a mid-morning event on a Tuesday or Wednesday. And we have service providers that come and speak about who they serve, what they do, the barriers that their clients are facing. And it's a really great way to be kind of a smaller, more intimate setting to learn a little bit more how to get involved, a little bit more specifics about those particular service providers. Our next one is Tuesday, November 19th, and we have Babies of Homelessness speaking, as well as T2P2, which stands for Towers of Tampons and Pyramids of Pads. So we're talking about basic needs for people living on the streets. So you can, if you're not already on our mailing list, let me know and I will add you, because they're really great events. So I also want to do a big shout out to PRMI, Primary Residential Mortgage, who paid for our dinner tonight and made this all possible. And so thank you to PRMI. And to Seattle U for hosting us here at this really perfect venue for an event like this. So I'm gonna let you all go. If on your way out, you could please drop your name tags on the table where you picked them up, then I can reuse them. Reuse, reduce, recycle. So please drop off your name tags so I can use them again. And thank you all for coming.